In this video, I'm going to talk about how an agreement for sale works. So everyone knows normally when you buy a house, and this is a creative way to sell a house or to buy a house, and I'll explain some situations when it can be beneficial. And I have actually done one of these personally with a property, so I'm not speaking from, it's not theory, this is actual practice. I've actually done this. So in a normal scenario, when you buy a house, so let's assume someone's buying a $200,000 house, and they are putting down $50,000. They would need, in order to buy it, because the seller wants $200,000, they're going to need $150,000. And typically they go to a bank or a credit union, so they go to CIBC or TD, and they'll get their $150,000. Seller's happy. What does TD get? TD or the bank, and whoever the bank is, they register on your title. So we don't have deeds anymore. At one time you probably heard of, in the old cowboy movies, deeds, and it was this piece of paper that basically said you own the land. Now we have titles, and registered on your title, and they're kept at a place called a land titles office. So that's actually an office where they keep track of who owns what. And on that title, there would be a charge, and if it was TD Bank, there would be a charge for TD Bank on the title. So then the homeowner still owns the property, but TD obviously has an interest in it because they've loaned money. And depending on how your contract's written up, if you don't make payments, obviously they could foreclose on you and potentially take your house. So that's a normal way to buy a property, and it usually works fairly well. I'm going to show you another way that you can buy a property with what's called an agreement for sale. So let's assume exact same scenario, and with a couple little twists, and show you when this becomes useful. So house is $200,000, and there's a fellow buying the house, and he has $50,000. But let's imagine this particular person, they just moved to Canada, and they're getting a new job, but for whatever reason, they don't actually fit in any lending guidelines. So if we tried to get them a loan today, they just can't get a loan. So they can't get a loan. So what they could do is they could say to the seller, Mr. Seller, I'm going to give you $50,000, and can you carry a mortgage for me for $150,000? So here's how this works. Imagine this is the homeowner's mortgage, and he owed $100,000. And the homeowner had a $100,000 mortgage at, let's say it's at 4%. Okay, so he says, okay, you know what, I don't need all my money today. I'm willing to, and I want to sell my house, so I'm willing to carry a $150,000 mortgage for you. How do we do this? So what we do is, we'll look at that title again. So here's the title. And registered on the title, so the owner, the current owner would still be registered on the title, but on there, and he's got a mortgage. Let's assume it's with CIBC. He's got a mortgage with CIBC. Then we register what's called a registered purchase agreement. An RPA gets registered on title, and that is what the document that outlines the buyer's interest in the property. So how does this work? So what he says is, oh great, I carry a mortgage at $100,000 for 4%. I'm willing to give you, the buyer, a mortgage of $150,000, but I want 6%. And he's completely within his right to do this because obviously he is tying up some of his money. So he would carry a mortgage for 6%. He would make interest on $150,000 at 6% and pay interest on $100,000 at 4%. Now, one of the things you do have to get permission from your lender. They don't always want you. They don't like you to do this, but it can be done, and I have done it. So, and I'll explain to you why there's situations why this can be beneficial. So, this particular person can't get their own mortgage right now. This gets registered on title. And so how this works is the buyer would make payments to the seller, and the seller would make payments to their bank. And basically, this payment is quite a bit higher than this payment, so they would pocket the difference. What happens in this scenario, too, is that if this particular buyer, all of a sudden, they decide, you know what, I'm paying 6%, interest rates are at 4% or 5%, I want a new mortgage. If they want to go out and get their own mortgage, and they've had it for a while, and now he's been in Canada for a while, let's assume he's got credit, he's got a stable job, we can actually get him credit. or get him a loan, then he could. It's actually a refinance. So this is the strange part. It's no longer a purchase. If he goes to get his own mortgage, it's actually considered a refinance. So he would then go apply. Maybe he goes to CIBC, so the buyer applies at CIBC, or he goes somewhere else. Let's say he goes to Bank of Montreal, and he applies for a loan, and then he would pay out whatever he owes to the original buyer. So that's probably sounds a little bit complicated, and you'd say, well, why would you do that? Well, there's a few instances. One, let's assume that the market's very soft, and he wants $200,000 for his house, but maybe in order to sell it in today's market, he needs to sell it for $175 or maybe less. So in order to get a better price for his house, he's not selling it based on price, he's selling it based on terms. So that there are different ways to sell property. And that's one of the reasons I sold my property with an agreement for sale, was because I was able to get a better price than if I would have just sold it as a regular purchase, a regular price. So that's how it works. It's fully legal. It's all done with lawyers. So this may sound totally foreign and abstract to you, but we use lawyers. This is actually a very common way to transfer property. So at one time, when people owned farms, and of course there weren't as many lending options, they had to use each other. So the fellow who owned the farm would give a mortgage to the guy who was buying it, and they'd pay each other out. And so it is not an uncommon way to purchase real estate. It's just it kind of fell out of favor. Well, we had a lot of subprime lenders that came into the marketplace in the last few years, and they sort of picked. There was no need to do this because there was always a lender willing to do it. In our current market, subprime lenders are not as aggressive as they once were. So this is an option for people in order to buy a house. So what type of person would consider doing an agreement for sale? Well, a person who cannot get a loan currently in their own name. So another person, I talked about, maybe they're new to Canada. Another person would be so I'm going to write that down, new to Canada. The other type of person is maybe they're they're a new business owner. So they've been a plumber for a long time, and they decide to start a plumbing business or a completely different business, and they may not be able to get a loan. So in their case, an agreement for sale can work. It works well for a seller who is trying to make his property stand out in a marketplace if there's a lot of inventory. So it is something to consider. I'm going to tell you that you have to talk to your lawyer about it, and the way that this was structured was in British Columbia, so there could be some differences depending on your province, how the actual rules work. But in British Columbia, this is a very rough sketch of how it can work. If you have questions on how these work, you could send me an email to scott@scottpeckford.ca.